Hello again. Welcome back. Welcome back to another episode of Photographer Talks. And this week it's going to be quite a nice big one, really. Bringing out the big guns, as I like to think. A photographer whose images I have long admired and who always seems to get himself to great places, whether on land or up in the air. Nikon USA Ambassador, G-Team Ambassador, and SanDisk Extreme Team. Who is it? It's Lucas Gilman. Lucas Gilman is absolutely one of the leading adventure photographers and filmmakers in the industry. His powerful and incisive images run in top publications and advertisements around the world. A love of adventure and a self-professed addiction to colour creates his very distinct style of photography and filmmaking. Just take a look at his Instagram account. It's full of astounding images. Lucas documents subjects ranging from expedition kayaking in India and Costa Rica, surfing in Brazil, to backcountry skiing in Colorado, Alaska, and South America. He also documented the largest ever waterfall run, the 189-foot tall Palouse Falls in Washington State with Rafa Ortiz. He's covered international events such as the Tour de France, the Kentucky Derby, ESPN X-GAMES, IRONMAN and NFL Playoffs. He regularly works with advertising and editorial clients that span the globe, including Land Rover, Nikon, SanDisk, Red Bull, GTEC, Garmin, GORE-TEX, National Geographic, Sports Illustrated, ESPN Magazine, and Outside. He's quite a legend. Please do join me in welcoming Lucas Gilman to your screens. There he is. How did I do?
Did great. Very kind.
Well, it's all the truth.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. It's great to have you. So look, before we kick off, Lucas and I have a nice little surprise here. The guys over at North Drinkware, so reasonably local to Lucas, have been kind enough to sponsor us this week with a giveaway of a set of 2 glasses. What you might say is so wonderful about them? Well, have a look at this picture. These pictures, incidentally, shot by Lucas. These guys over at North Drinkware have, by the powers of glass-blowing magic, managed to put a mountain in your glass. So if you want to be in the running to receive them, put your name in the comments field of the YouTube or head over to the Instagram profile for Photographer Talks and put a comment in there. Lucas and I will then draw a winner before the week is out. They are pretty amazing. So, on with the show. Lucas, amazing to see you. It's been a few years, but you're looking good and the sun is shining. It's not where I am. How are you?
Good. It's cold in California by California standards, but I can't complain. I'm wearing flip-flops and we can still barbecue outside. So besides that, the sun is shining.
Okay. There's not much chance I'm going to be putting flip-flops on. I'd go with the grilling outside, though. I'd definitely go with that. You've clearly been getting involved in the grilling recently by looking at some of the pictures on your Instagram. You've been finding your powers as a chef as well as taking amazing pictures, I see.
Yeah, we bought a Mercedes camper van at the end of last year, and we've been going out and doing local expeditions. We did the whole western United States, the whole coast. We did Jackson Hole, Colorado, Zion, Moab, Utah. We've driven 16,000 miles in the last year, basically, in the camper van, just going out with my family, taking pictures, and continuing to try to be creative in these kind of trying times as much as we can be. Since I'm not getting on airplanes and flying to Hawaii or Tahiti anymore, I'm now trying to find things in my own backyard to stay sharp and continue to, be a creative.
Indeed. Well, you must have found some pretty impressive things with your camper van. So that's a really sound idea. That's an awesome amount of miles you've covered there. You have you come back with some great shots?
We have, I started photography in the mountains, but the coast really is absolutely in my heart. And, the rugged Southern Oregon coast, as well as Big Sur in California. That's kind of why we moved to California, was because of Big Sur. We found some magical places. And, I would say if anybody's looking to improve their photography, look in their own backyard and try to find some things that would inspire them, because, honestly, there are a lot of amazing things, all over the world, and some are just a short distance away.
That's very, very true. Very wise. I think a lot of what's happened for a lot of people has made them realize that, and clearly no better than yourself to be not hopping on planes and going to places that you're used to. Do you have a particular favorite that you've found in the last few months? A Lucas favorite spot?
I'd say the Southern Oregon coast is probably one of the most magical places in the country. It's rugged. It's far enough away from any major population centers that it's quiet. And there's just these amazing spires going out into the ocean. And it's in one sense very inhospitable, because it's windy, it's rugged, it can be cold. But then in the same sense, it's absolutely beautiful. And there's these moments in between where the wind goes down, it's calm, the sun comes out, and there's just everything comes together. So I would say that would be a recent find. There's just so many places, it's hard to single it out to one. There's Utah, Moab, Zion, Canyonlands, absolutely stunning landscapes. We were there recently, and it was 107 degrees in Fahrenheit, as we do here. But it was, in the sense, it was quiet because it was so hot. Everybody was either in their hotel rooms or otherwise, and not out and about. But the camper van allows us to go out, be at a location, wake up somewhere that's magical, and just be there, as opposed to commuting from a population center.
Yeah. Have you been to most of these places prior to this year, or not at all?
A few of them. I've definitely expanded the reach. There's been some bucket list locations. I've never done the whole Oregon, California coast. So basically we did that loop twice. We included Crater Lake, and then just basically took the coast highway all the way down, and just would go as far as we wanted on any given day. And, it's amazing. You find these little towns, and you pull over for fish and chips at one little town, or maybe the town has Dungeness crab. You find a little market, you buy some things, and you just go out, and, you put yourself in a good position for sunrise or sunset the next day to go out and shoot something that you want. And you kind of just pick your way along, and every day is what you make of it.
That's very true. Yeah, it's the nomad lifestyle, isn't it, really? And you've mastered it sounds.
It is. I'm very lucky that I have a very supportive wife and a son who enjoy the adventuring. I will say we figured out after 2.5 to 3 weeks in the van together, three people plus our 60-pound dog. She's a Weimaraner. That's about the most that we need before we have a break, because 144-inch wheelbase. It's between dog, kid, wife, and just trying to live. It's very close. We're very close family, I guess you could say. Yeah. Challenging. And maybe it's just that maybe I just have a challenging personality. I don't know. So, but yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Very lucky to be able to do it. And we're, I would say, as a side note, we are trying to travel as responsibly as possible by trying to minimize impact on local communities. We're not going out to, all these restaurants and things, we're trying to, just shop wisely and, stay away from people and social distance so that we can try to hopefully bring this pandemic, which has gotten pretty bad here in the States, into line. So we're not out there just, practicing social distancing and wearing protective stuff when we're out in public. And the other time we're out in the wild, which is a pretty safe place to be.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, so long as you take care in whatever it is you're up to. So, I mean, when you're out there, have you been doing other activities, such as kayaking or shooting people out there doing that, or more just addressing the landscape and its beauty?
Oh, a little bit of both. I mean, I definitely come from that adventure. Well, some would say extreme sports, which was such a catchphrase in the the 90s and 2000s. But I've tried to transition now that I'm a little older. You can't tell because of the gray or anything, but
it's really pixelated. You're fine.
Oh, good. So the gray's not showing up. Good. I've tried to transition a little more into, I would call it little person, big landscape, not as adrenaline driven. But it was a great, for instance, I met up with Rafa Ortiz, Red Bull athlete, world famous kayaker Rafa Ortiz in the river and where he lives, and got to meet his little one, and I hadn't seen him since his wedding, but it was a great excuse to go out and kind of reconnect with some of these characters that I've photographed over the years. But in the current times, I've been photographing some pretty exciting things, lots of food, which has been fun and challenging. And then, like I said, little person, big landscape, which is kind of ironically how I started my career out. Before I knew athletes, I really went out and kind of, it was more about the landscape and adding that human element. So I've kind of gone back that direction a little bit. It's a little less impact on the body, and it's also, all these shoots, and I think we're going to look at some pictures in a bit. All these shoots have taken many years for the stars to align. So just to go out and truly take photos for the sake of just making images is become very important to me again, to go out and just continue to practice the craft, even if it's something that I may never use for a portfolio, it may never sell, but to go out and produce something on any given day that you're proud of. I think that's what originally drew me to photography, was that I could go out and produce something every single day, and something that you may not be necessarily, it may not be portfolio worthy, but you learn something, whether it was a new technique, you started doing something like night photography or long exposures, or, even working with my wife and, shooting photos of her and posing and things like that. You learn all these things by just the practice of the craft.
Indeed.
So where when, hopefully when we get back on track, I'll have a few, tricks in my toolbox, I guess you could say. I always feel like as a photographer, you're kind of like a handyman, right? Like the more things you can do well, the better photographer you're going to be, because if you can shoot action and you can shoot portraits and you can shoot artistic images and you can shoot landscapes and all these different things, it allows you to kind of, I guess you could say, reinvent yourself. I've been a photographer professionally going on almost 22 years now.
Yeah.
And reinventing yourself is no joke, I guess you could say. You have to go out and you get known for a certain style, but then that style may be, it's almost like if you want to put it in Instagram terms, everything is stylistically the same for a while, or it has its certain niche, and then from there it changes. And as a photographer, you don't want your style to look dated. It's like, almost like in a skiing perspective, skinny skis versus fat skis,
Nice.
and such.
Nice
so
analogy.
you don't want to be that guy that's like, oh yeah, that guy, that's obviously from like the 90s. That lighting style is so, whether it's the ring light or whatever, and all these things come back into style as in fashion, but you don't want to be known as kind of, I guess you could say, a one-trick pony.
No, no, very true. Indeed, an interesting comment, bearing in mind that last night I was doing a little bit of reading about Don McCullin, kind of one of the most famous photographers from Britain, if not the most famous photographer. But I'm not going to say war photographer, because what I was reading from his notes was that for years he was a war photographer. He was known only as a war photographer. And although he's 85 now, and ironically he lives very close to where I live here, about half an hour's drive. He doesn't want to be known as a war photographer. He wants to be known as a photographer. In fact, he wants to be known as a landscape photographer now, because he's done that bit. He now wants to be doing something else, and he's a photographer. Like you're a photographer. You can turn your hand to a kayaker down Palouse Falls or a skier off a rock in Colorado to photographing a very nice glass or a tomahawk steak. So, I think the funny thing is, as a photographer, it's generally the act of taking that picture that is satisfying, and what that message, what the end picture communicates. It doesn't necessarily have to be action sports, extreme sports, or whatever, but you get a buzz from doing the action of clicking the trigger itself. And it certainly sounds, from reading about Don McCullin and what you've just said, that indeed rings true.
For sure. And I mean, as we know, photography comes down to light. That's the basis of photography, and really seeing that light and being able to wait for it if we're shooting landscapes, or knowing where that sun's going to come up or where it's going to go down, or is in the tomahawk steak that you talked about just a minute ago. Like, how do we light this in an interesting way? Is it window light? Is it a little, are we making light? Are we using light? And really seeing that and studying that, I think, is something that is there's something cerebral about that, to study and to notice the play of light and shadow and contrast and things like that. And when I was in college, I actually went to school to be a writer. I didn't go to school to be a photographer, but I found out pretty quickly that was like way too much work. And I remember my journalism 101, and it was like court reporting, and like I had to like literally go to the courthouse and like take notes and write stories on like court cases. And I was like, this is the worst job I have ever thought of. I thought, writer, I'll be a magazine writer. Well, little did I know there's not that many magazine writing jobs. You start out at a newspaper.
Yeah.
So I had always been the kid who wanted to take the family photos, but I never knew that there was actually a career to be had as a photographer. But I took this photojournalism 101 class. Kevin Maloney, my professor, was a New York Times stringer, very, very respected photographer. And I remember that he had this, as we say in the Nikon, not Nikon, but Nikon F5. I know Nikon is probably correct, because Americans, we don't ever pronounce anything correctly. But he had a Nikon F5. And I remember looking through that camera, and I was hooked. I was like, this is the coolest thing. And he had all these images from Cuba and South America. And so while I was in this class, one of our segment was spot news, was to cover a spot news thing, was an assignment. Yeah. And I was coming home late from the library one night, and I happened upon this horrible double fatality accident. This is back in the days of shooting black and white film. Yeah. And I pulled out my camera, I photographed the scene, and the next day I went to the dark room and processed my film by hand, as we did in the old days. And my professor was like, wow, you actually did a very good job of covering this. You may want to send these to the Denver Post in Colorado, which was the largest newspaper in the state. And they ended up publishing the images on the front page of the regional section. And I got a check for $150. And that was when I said I could actually make money as a photographer. This is like, so I started, and all of a sudden I got one assignment for them, two assignments for them, three assignments. And all of a sudden I was working part-time while I was in college for this newspaper. And newspaper photographers, they give you the hardest assignments ever. When I mean like hard, it's like, they're like, okay, you're going to photograph a high school football game on the prairie. But it's so dark that they have to literally bring the cars and shine their lights on the field. So this is back in the days of film where it wasn't like we just turn up the ISO on our camera and go, oh, it looks pretty good. You really had to learn. It was truly learning that craft. And I think that made me a better photographer, to be able to go and make a decent picture in pretty much any situation. And then there came a time where I wanted to produce quality over quantity. I wanted to shoot portraits instead of at noon. I wanted to shoot them at sunset or sunrise when the light was good. And so that's when, I moved to Jackson Hole, took a job for a tiny newspaper there and a magazine, but it allowed me to live in one of the most beautiful places in the world. And that's where I kind of went back to my roots. My dad was a fly fishing guide in Colorado, and I got to travel with him around the world as a kid to like Costa Rica and South America, New Zealand. And that kind of adventure side came back, and I just started photographing backcountry skiing and kayaking, and luckily fell in with some of the best kayakers in the world who are still friends to this day. And that's that was in I'd say that was around 2002 that I kind of fell right after graduating college. So it's been a long time.
That's impressive. I mean, it's really nice to hear the story that it was a happen chance, really, that kind of got you off the ground, but not necessarily your own belief, but the belief of your lecturer. And he said, no, you can do something with these. And it was that solid belief that kind of put you on the path. And obviously you haven't looked back since, but it's really nice to hear that, you kind of were driven by somebody else. And he then confirmed your skill set, and lo and behold, now how many plus years later you're still doing it, which is testament to your skills, clearly. But you talk about moving into kind of kayaking and skiing. Were you a big kayaker? Were you a big skier at that period of time? Because obviously going from photojournalism to shooting for the local newspaper to photographing a kayaker or a skier is pretty different.
Totally. So I grew up skiing in Colorado, and I was a very proficient skier. But moving to Jackson Hole, I definitely needed to push the skill set. The average skier in Jackson Hole, basically Jackson Hole, if people aren't aware, is kind of the Alps of the U.S. Very steep, very aggressive terrain, lots of massive cliffs, a very liberal open boundary policy that allows you to ski into the backcountry, hike into the backcountry. So it's kind of a mecca for backcountry skiing and outdoor enthusiasts. For instance, Jimmy Finn, who I'm sure everybody knows who that is from Jackson Hole. Brain Farm, who did the Travis Rice films, was based in Jackson Hole. So you're really there in the mecca of, backcountry skiing. To this day, I'm really not a kayaker. I'm a really good bushwhacker, though. I mean, there were so many, basically we would look at a map and I'd say, all right, I need to get to this point, and we would bushwhack, we would rappel into canyons, we would, do whatever it took to get to these locations, because I came into there's a lot of great kayaking photographers that were kayakers, but I came into it looking at it as though, from a photographer standpoint, I was there to produce images, not just to go kayaking. So, I would bring multiple camera bodies. Back when we actually had paper publications, magazines and such, I'd set up 2 to 3 cameras. So I would have a cover photo being vertical, right? I'd have a horizontal 2-page spread, and then maybe one that was a little tighter for a detail. So I'd, do 2 to 3 camera bodies on every big waterfall drop. And then I just kind of started, working with all those connections, going to India. Rafa Ortiz and I, and Ben Stooksbury, who's kind of one of the most preeminent expedition kayakers in the world. Ben said, "Hey, we're going to India." And I said, "Well, where?" And he goes, "I don't know. We'll kind of figure it out." And we spent a month in India on planes, trains, automobiles. We had gypsies push us across the river on canoes in the car. We drive the car onto these canoes lashed together with 2x4s. We were stuck. We were, 1,000 miles from anybody who spoke English. We had some local guides. We'd get a flat tire like 3 times a day. Just epic times, I guess you could say. And it really, I think, formulated me as a person to go out and not be afraid to go out and find those interesting scenarios. Not afraid to sleep on the ground, in the mud, in the cold. This is not a 4 seasons experience. Although I love, really good food and nice hotels, that other side of it, sleeping in the dirt, getting, roughing it, the sufferfest, I guess you could say, really gives you a good grounding and a good balance. And, I was lucky enough that they would let me tag along, even though I wasn't a kayaker per se, but they knew that I would produce images which were better than what people were doing that were just getting out of their boats and shooting stuff from the shore. I would find a canyon, I'd shoot down, I'd find, some specific locations. And with, I guess my main thing in the photography is I still work from the background first. So I would find these amazing backgrounds and then see where these kayaks would be as far as in the landscape, and shoot images which were interesting and not just the typical, I guess you could say, water level shots.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, no better place to start than the shot of Lower Mesa Falls in Idaho, right? A perfect example. I mean, actually, just to look at the shot, it does make you wonder how much you bushwhacked through, or what you even did to get to this one, or where you were stood. I'm putting it on screen now. The other element that I think I'm really interested here is then the variation on it, which is where you started to discover your love of sequencing, or sequences, should I say. And so, this shot transforms into the mother of all sequences, with the scariest looking water alive. This was, I didn't actually get the date that you shot this, but was this one of those typical kind of ones you've described where you've bushwhacked your way through, or was this from some other flying object?
So are we talking about the Palouse shot, or are we talking about a sequence shot?
No, the Lower Mesa Falls sequence shot.
Lower Mesa Falls, sorry.
Yeah.
So this is actually, this is one of, we call this one a park and huck. It was actually one of the easiest ones for me to get to. But this Lower Mesa Falls had not been run. It'd been run, but not often at this point. And I can actually thank Red Bull for giving me the love of the sequence. It was one of those things that was drilled as a Red Bull photographer. It was always like, we have to have the sequence in every assignment. So I started shooting these sequences and figuring out, how many frames per second actually looks good, because at that point the cameras were shooting 8, 9, 10, whatever frames per second. And I figured out that actually 5 frames per second, which is not that fast, is actually the perfect framing, because if you shoot too many frames, a lot of times they are overlapped, or they're not overlapped enough. So through trial and error, I figured out 5 frames a second was actually the best for shooting those kind of vertical sports, because not only did it give you a longer buffer, because, we're talking, back in the day when digital cameras didn't have, 100 in the buffer, you maybe got 30 or something.
Yeah.
You couldn't just push the button and go, okay, he's going. I figured out 5 frames a second would allow us to basically shoot a really cool sequence. That waterfall it's is gnarly in a sense because the consequences, if you go river left where he's going as he comes down, is not that there's not a ton of consequences unless he gets sucked over into the middle of that falls. There's basically a rock that the bigger side is going off of, and there's a hole behind that. And if you would go into that hole, you probably wouldn't come back out. So as long as you stayed to the river left, you would be fine. But this was one of those things where, you know, I had seen this, and and with most of my photography, I had envisioned exactly, and working with the athletes, exactly like, all right, where are you going to go? From there, I'm going to set up the camera to basically make this look as interesting as possible. And we found that, ironically, that the overlook for the waterfall, they picked a pretty good spot, even after hiking all over, down the canyon, down to the river, all the way back up, that literally setting up on the sidewalk in the parking lot was the actual best spot with a long lens. And that's another thing is lens choice. You know, everybody thinks of these landscape images because it's kind of a landscape, right? It's kind of little person, big landscape. That's actually shot with a 300 millimeter lens. So that compressing that long lens actually makes that waterfall look even more impressive than it does, because it kind of like, you know, makes it look like that. So lens choice as well.
There you go. There's a top tip. There's a couple of top tips from Lucas. 5 frames per second, people. 5 frames per second.
5 frames per second.
Always remember that. Don't need any more. But that's being more considered, right, in your photography. So I mean, a lot of your work, I guess, more recently, we're talking about in the camper van is more considered. But there's always the odd sort of lucky shot, and I think the best lucky shot that I've always known you for is the one that's on this funny little book that I say funny, that's not fair. These little books you gave me many years ago. These great little advertising books, front and back. But this shot, I'll put it on screen now there we go, the Black River. This is I think it's probably my all-time favorite shot of yours, because when I first started at Red Bull all those years ago, it was one that just jumped out to me massively, and I actually used it as the basis for a lot of projects I was working on. But this was a shot that you just chanced upon, right, off the back of a shoot with Steve Fisher. So it's not always about the best planning. It's not always about the best laid plans. It's
as they say as a photographer, it's not, you know, if there's a problem, it's how big is the problem and how do you solve it, right? So this actually was, I was there to photograph Steve Fisher going off what they said were going to be waterfalls in northern Wisconsin. And we get there, and these waterfalls, they're like 10 feet, 12 feet. The water is brown. It's like the worst possible scenario. Like, it was like, why are we even here? Like, you know, three flights later, drive 5 hours, get to this river, and you're like, I could have been like I could be in India right now at a massive, cool waterfall, and we're here in northern Wisconsin. And it's like, okay, well, I guess we're going to shoot these pictures because that's what Red Bull has hired me to do the best you can, right? And as we're coming back from this totally lackluster shoot, like I was just ready to get reamed because I didn't come back with the goods, even though there was no goods to be had. Yeah. I'm walking across this bridge, and I look down because I've got, 80 pounds of camera. I've got three bodies, 10 lenses. I've got lights. I've got all this stuff for the shoot. I look down as I'm crossing this bridge to go back to hike to the parking lot, and there's this pattern. That pattern you see that you showed there of soap bubbles. Now this is the Black River, and I'm like, oh, that's why they call this the Black River. The sun was just starting to set, so it was very low. And I look upstream, and the crew of kayakers, Steve Fisher included, is paddling down to where they're going to take out right at the bridge. And I put one and one together, and it's like, oh, he's going to go right under me. So I did do a test shot for an exposure and shot 4 frames as he goes under me and made that picture, which is definitely one of my favorite pictures that I've ever done as well. And it was, people always go, you must have photoshopped it. I'm like, no, that literally out of the camera, it looks just like that. Like the light was the right angle. Like it looks like it was strobe because it's so low, you know, like it's just everything, the stars aligned. And, you know, and I guess I would say as a photographer that you should always, I'm always looking to be open to something, especially, you know, because the best laid plans, you know, if we get in our head too much and we focus on exactly, oh no, this is what I'm doing, I'm shooting this portrait, I'm doing this and I'm doing that, and just walk back to the car after that, you'll miss a lot of things. So being, I guess, malleable to change and to things changing, whether that's the weather, the personalities, the athletes, you know, makes you a more consistent, but also I think makes you a happier person, because like I said, I wanted to always produce something. And I went from 0 basically on that shoot to hero, because that picture, even though the rest of the shoot, they could care less about, we produced one picture which was stunning enough, even though it had nothing to do with the story that they wanted to tell, that, you know, that we walked away with something that was, client was happy, I was happy, you know, Fisher was happy. And that's one thing, working with athletes as a photographer. Athletes are obviously your biggest asset, especially if you're an adventure photographer, and being able to be easy to work with, but also those athletes have to trust you that every time you go out together, that you're going to bring back the goods, that you're not just a prima donna, that you're not going to say, oh, it's cold, it's rainy, like I don't really feel, I'm not feeling it, you know. Like if they're gonna go, you better be willing to hike faster, carry more weight, be ahead of them, especially like in the days of my backcountry skiing. You never have people wait for you. If you want to get pictures, you better hustle your butt up and around and get to the location you want to photograph them. It's not like you're gonna, especially professional athletes that are doing this, they're not going to wait for you. You need to get up there, and you need to, you know, you need to work hard and work faster, essentially.
Yeah, that's very true. It's a lot of effort, but the rewards obviously are big. You know, the big thanks, the big pats on the back, so long as you come out with those pictures. You know, I mean, obviously it sounds, the more I talk to you, it sounds like Lucas Gilman has definitely had some sort of good, lucky moments that keep sort of driving you forward, you know. So you've worked hard, but you've had these little sort of golden moments that keep punching you forward. The Palouse Falls, then, you know, that's the biggest drop that has ever been done. Rafa did, and I know he tried to do Niagara after that, but didn't. This shot is another kind of classic, you know, Lucas. Stick it up on there. I mean, this is massive. You're clearly in a chopper here, which, well, I say you're clearly. Were you in a chopper?
No, I was actually just up on the cliff edge, and it was so I'll tell you the story of this shoot. Was I've known Rafa since he was, I guess, 17 or 18, before he had a single sponsor. We did a trip in Mexico together, and he called me and said, I'm going to do Palouse Falls. And I said, you're going to do what? And he goes, yeah, I'm going to do Palouse. So I'm like, okay, well, if you're going to do Palouse Falls, I'm there. Like, when?
See, it's another lucky one, right?
Yeah, exactly. Another lucky one. Well, you know, put yourself in the best place you can to be lucky, right? And so he's like, oh, like, you know, I think it was like, he's like, oh, probably day after tomorrow, you know? So it was like, okay, I'm getting on a plane today, or, you know, and we get there, and I was just like, Rafa, I'm like, you're crazy, dude. Like, I have kind of a fear of heights, kind of ironic being an adventure photographer, but I looked off the lip of that thing, and I was like, no, this is never going to happen. This is death. And so we get there, I set up 3 cameras, all all set up with pocket wizards at that point. And because I was worried that when he went off, that if I was hand holding one, that I was going to miss the shot. And I was worried, first of all, that my friend Rafa, who I'd known for many years, was possibly not going to come back from this. And that I was probably going to have to call his parents if in fact this went south, and say, hate to tell you the news, but Rafa didn't make it. So I was terrified of losing my friend. But the second thing I was terrified was, if I didn't get the shot, if I didn't make this shot, which was historical, I'm also basically being the historian of reference in the stills capacity here. Yeah. If I didn't get the shot, I would definitely lose my friend, because Rafa would never forgive me for that. I mean, he might. I mean, but in my mind, it was like, why would he ever forgive me, right? Because I missed the shot of his crowning achievement. So we're there that day, and he'd been sponsored by Red Bull for a bit, and finally we worked out that he was going to get a helicopter and a Cineflex to film this for this film that Rush Sturgis was going to be filming.
Yeah.
And we were staying in a hotel an hour away, and Rafa was my roommate, and he was really having a hard time, coming to terms with, if he was going to do this waterfall or not, because it's a big decision. I mean, there's a good chance you could come back, or not come back, or be paralyzed, or be severely injured. And, I just kept saying, Rafa, like, no Kodak courage, but if you want to just get in the car and we'll just cruise, like, I won't think less of you. You know what I mean? Like, because you're as a photographer, when you come into these situations where you're working with in situations, whether it's skiing or backcountry skiing or kayaking or even surfing, you're a member of the crew. You're a member of the team first. And obviously you're there to document something, but I would never push somebody into doing something so that I could make a better photo, because the minute you do that, it's a very small industry. The higher you go, and the athletes, and you'd never, first of all, would never want anybody to be injured because of something you did, but you also, want to be able to sleep well at night. So the day of the shoot comes, and Rafa disappears. We're like, where's Rafa? Everybody, I've got my 3 cameras. There's a couple filmers. We got a guy rappelled off halfway down so that he can film him as he goes by. It's kind of not a big production, but a production. We're waiting for the Cineflex helicopter, which is an hour late, and Rafa's disappeared. And we're like, did he just bail? And finally somebody goes, oh, we found Rafa. He's taking a nap on the riverbank up here. He said to wake him up when the helicopter gets here. And I was like, well, I guess he found his inner peace, that he's good with it, because he's taking a nap on the riverbank waiting for the Cineflex helicopter. And helicopter comes, does a pass, radio comes up, all right, Rafa's in his boat, we're ready to go. He says he's ready. And he takes like 3 paddle strokes, and I see him for literally like 3 frames, and then he's engulfed in water.
Whoa.
And it was so scary, because he didn't come back up right away. Like, he was just gone. And you could hear on the radio, like, come on, Rafa. And like, it was like, I don't know how long it was. It seemed like forever. And then all of a sudden his boat pops up, and he pops up next to it. And, the safety kayakers go, and they pull him in and everything. Mm-hmm. And he was okay. And I was like, well, and little side note, if you swim in kayaking, meaning you get pulled out of your boat, you have to swim, you have to drink a booty beer, like pretty much right as you get out. So they had like a warm, nasty, probably like Bud Light or something, that he had to pour into his boot and drink like right then, because he swam. He got ripped out of his kayak. I asked him what it was like, and he was like, he's like, it was kind of like being like in a washing machine. And I was like, okay, I could see that, and he's like, and then roll it down a hill. So, but, Rafa, I got 3 different camera angles of that shot. Rafa came away unhurt, maybe a little minor concussion, but for the most part, unhurt. And it was, it was an honor to be able to document it and to be trusted to be that person to do that. But also really kind of amazing to see what people can do when they set their mind out to do something. I mean, some people say it's crazy. I'd say it's a calculated risk, right? Like there's a risk reward ratio, and obviously Rafa felt that he was within his capacity to be able to do this. And it didn't go exactly as he planned, because obviously he would have liked to have stayed in his boat. But I think that him walking away from it and running that waterfall was still pretty monumental.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I mean, it's massive. When you look at the picture, he is a dot, very much. I know
it's almost like you need a little arrow with sea kayaker here, right?
Yeah.
Like you're like, it's almost like the little person is too little. Like it's crazy how small
it is very much. And I mean, respect to you, obviously, because you say that he put himself through it, but obviously, you got on the plane, you took all your kit there, you went and did it, you had all the second thoughts you talked about, but you got the shot. And you got the shot as he just went over. I mean, there's like such a small window of opportunity there. That's ridiculous. He must have literally appeared around the rock and bang, there he was.
Exactly. And the thing is, I'm shooting 3 cameras, remote cameras, and you're like, in your mind, you're doing your mental checklist. Okay, focus, lock off the focus. Is my exposure set right? This is on 3 different cameras, right? Like, is everything, did I forget to turn off the autofocus on one camera? All this, the mental checklist of this is going on in your head. You're like, is this camera like set on, burst mode where I can shoot multiple frames? Did I have it on single mode? Like all these things, like you're like going through the checklist, like, okay, it's going to work. Test, retest, test, retest. Okay. It's all working. And then you're like, as it gets closer and closer, and at that point you're doing this and you don't even know if he's going to run it because he hasn't said it's good to go. He's still like on the fence. So you're like going through this whole, he's having a sleep and you're like, did he leave? Do I need to pack up my cameras? Like, that was quite an experience.
That's fascinating. But that's obviously your biggest kayak shot. We clearly don't have the time to run through all the pictures I'd love to talk about. But I think I'd really like to just run through some of your surf stuff, and in particular, Palouse Falls for kayaking is clearly the winner, and we've seen Black River, but North Shore Hawaii, Bonsai, if I got this right, Bonsai Pipeline, a couple of years back. Mm-hmm. You look at a couple of these shots, or you look at this shot rather, and you can see that you like this because this makes an appearance on the Instagram feed a few times, and for good reason. Quite honestly, it's an absolute belter. Obviously this time you are in a chopper, and this time this is another one like the Rafa, isn't it? You took the opportunity to go out and shoot, and you came back with some pretty astounding goods. Do you want to take us through what this one was about?
Yeah. So Bonsai Pipeline is kind of the mecca for everything surf. If it is the place. More surfing photos have been taken there probably than any other surf break on the planet, I would say, arguably, because it's just one of the most consistent waves in the world. So one of the best sets, coming in of the winter a few years ago. And it's pretty sad because you're there next to like 50 or 60 other photographers that are all just motoring through, making the exact same shots that you are. Mm. And you're like, we literally will all have the same pictures from today. Like you're just shoulder to shoulder. Some people are shooting pulled back. Some people are shooting tight, but literally you just hear what sounds like machine gun fire, just like over and over and over. And you're just like, and like I said, early in my career, the reason I left newspapers was because I wanted quality over quantity. I've never run my business just by shooting a ton of stock and going out and just, throwing as much at the wall to see what sticks. So, we took a lunch break, and I had a friend who works at a helicopter training school. And I said, I'm going to call my buddy and see if we can get up in the heli tonight. I'm going to pay out of pocket. So I called him and I said, but the caveat is, can you pick us up here on the North Shore? Because I don't have time to drive to Honolulu. There's a small heliport basically up on the North Shore. And he said, let me check. And I said, well, why? He goes, well, so this Robinson is due for service. I need to check how many hours we have on it. And I said, okay. He goes, we're coming up on the 10,000 hour mark on this Robinson. And if you know anything about Robinsons at 10,000 hours, the reason they service them typically is because they've had problems with the rotor braking, basically. And they then crash. So I'm like, okay. He goes, okay. So he calls me back. He says, we can do it, but we can literally only be in the air after I ferry to the North Shore and pick you up. We can probably be in the air for maybe 40, 45 minutes. I said, fine. That's perfect. That's all we need. We're going to go for sunset. I hope there's still waves at that point, but let's do it. So he comes to the North Shore. We actually sit on the tarmac for about 30 or 45 minutes because I wanted to wait until, because they only count the air time when you're in the air. Yeah. So we're just sitting there in the tarmac waiting, and I'm going, I hope I'm not missing all the best waves of the day right now because the light's really good, but it's going to get better. So finally I'm like, all right, by the time we get up there, approximately the light should be getting really good. And and I made this shot among others where the sun is getting very low, and you can see it's just the mist coming off of the waves at Pipeline is just, it's just golden glowing. Mm. And I'd never seen a picture. I mean, obviously there's lots of aerial shots of Pipeline and Jaws and but like I'd never seen one at the perfect time. And this all just kind of lined up. And like everything in life, nothing ventured, nothing gained. I mean, it was a gamble. Go spend money out of pocket to make a picture that may not happen. But, it was just very disconcerting to stand there on the beach with all these other people making the exact same picture.
Of course.
And
of course.
Why even do that? Because, at that point you're just another number. And
you're not showing your creativity.
Exactly. I mean, because and honestly, the cameras have gotten so good in the last few years. You take a Nikon out of a box, put a lens on it, perfectly exposed, perfectly sharp, like I stand next to you or another person, we can probably make the exact same picture, sharp, well exposed. I mean, it's when you start using what's between here that's what differentiates you as a photographer. Because
absolutely, yeah.
Early on in my career, you being somebody who knew the craft, you needed to know how to expose film or transparency. Knowing the craft helped you separate. If you could follow focus back in the days before autofocus, if you could follow focus, you could do these things. That separated you. Now it's more of a mental game. What separates you now is being able to think of different scenarios, whether that be different angles or different lighting and things. So yeah, it worked out. It's sold many times for covers and as well as wall art around the world for lots of curated things. And it was it's one of those ones where you're like, yes, it all worked out, right?
Absolutely.
Like it could have just as easily been marine layer comes in, waves are shot for the day, and I just spent $1,500 to get in a helicopter to go do a tour of the North Shore. But in that case, it worked out. So
it would have been a lovely helicopter ride regardless. But you got the shot. I mean, I think the other elements I love about it are the fact that you've got a yellow surfboard with that matches the sunlight, the sunset, and the turquoise glow coming through the tube itself is pretty amazing. I mean, it's definitely a fantastic shot. I could see it on a wall. I could see it on my wall behind me, actually, quite nicely.
I can make that happen. I know a guy.
It's pretty, yeah, it's pretty special. So yeah, from that to, I think we'll just have one more picture because weirdly, bizarrely, we have caned through time and it's been particularly fascinating talking to you. But from that amazing shot to something totally different, and I just want to show the other side of where sort of Lucas Gilman's going now, is of Raga Ragnar's. Mm-hmm. So of your Iceland work. So this is completely the other end of the spectrum. I recognize this, the landscape, because I did a shoot myself there a number of years back. And this is, I mean, it's super stunning. It was for, no, actually, no, you tell me, Raga Ragnar's. Tell us about it.
So Raga is she's an actress. She is a lead on Vikings, the series. She is Gunhilda, but I know her because she was a friend of a friend, and I started working on this Gigapixel project a few years ago.
Indeed.
Where I would go out and start. Basically, I wanted to shoot portraits that were more than just a portrait. They were many, many, many pictures put together to make one image. And so there wasn't in the beginning a lot of budget to go do this. This is purely for the passion of doing something. And so it was find a friend of a friend. And I love Iceland. I've been there, I guess, 13 or 14 times now. And always thought, that this beautiful moss, texture. And again, and I keep hitting this, I start with every photo of the background first. So I see this palette, if you were a painter, this mossy, undulated, beautiful stuff is being my background. And what better than to put, Raga is also an Olympic swimmer. She was in London Olympics as well as in the Brazil Olympics as a swimmer. So, she's obviously very fit, beautiful woman, but I wanted to show her not because she's so strong and powerful. I wanted to show more of a kind of a soft side to her.
Yeah. And
so I chose black and white, and it's actually, I shot this infrared, black and white, and it gave it kind of an interesting look.
Yeah. So
I had a Nikon D800 converted to infrared and did part of the project in this. And I think this one is one of the when this is one I was still learning how this all worked. I think this was only about 12 images put together. I've gone up to doing 80 or 120 images together now to make some more complex of these gigapixel portraits. But yeah, I mean, you're in Iceland, you've got a beautiful landscape, you've got a world-class athlete / actress. Can you think of a better scenario to make a really interesting image?
Absolutely.
So again, put yourself in a good position to make good pictures, and sometimes it works out.
Yeah, quite. Self-fund and be creative is definitely the secret to kind of driving consistently forward. Now, tell me, your work, obviously we talked about at the beginning, has been dominated by adventure sports, extreme sports, now more into the tech side with the Gigapixel. Is there something that you have not shot that you would like to shoot? Have you got something that's sort of grating away, especially now that life is a bit different?
Well, that's an interesting question. So coming from the photography background, I've now started, I'd say 50% of what I do is motion based. So I've gone into film and more into that direction. And photography is my first love, but also there's so much more you can do. Like, to tell a story in one image is so hard, right? To distill this down and to tell a story in one image that is the takeaway from the day is so hard. With motion, with sound, I've really fallen in love with doing video motion work as well. because there's just so much more that you can do with it. You think about it, everything from the cadence of the score to the pace of how it's cut, it all leaves a feeling, and it's just another level of complexity. And the funny thing is, those are all just many still images put together to make motion, right? If you want to think of it that way. I'm good at making that one image. Now thinking about making all those images and how they relate to the images in front and behind, that's been something that's been very cerebral and very, it's a whole new chapter, I guess you could say, because it's like you just picked up a camera for the very first time. There's all this stuff that you don't know. And, I'm one of the, I would say the day that I start saying I know everything about anything is the day that I should just hang it up. So even with photography, I still learn something every time I go out. And whether that's just what not to do. I get this question all the time on, Instagram and at trade shows and things when I speak. It's like, well, how do I get to your level? And I said, well, the difference between me and you is I've obviously made way more mistakes than you have. And they go, what do you mean? And I said, well, I now can notice that I'm making these mistakes faster than you probably would, because I've already made these mistakes. I've already, through learned behavior, I start seeing when things are not working, as far as when I'm taking photos and things. Like you've learned these things over the years, and it just takes time. So yeah, I think that to be a great photographer, you just have to make more mistakes than other people. It's funny. I mean, it's that whole 10,000 hour thing. I don't know if that is true, but like with anything, the more time and effort you put into something, the more you truly and passionately pursue it, the more dividends you're going to get. And being your own worst critic, and I don't mean to say that I want to beat myself up, but there's never been a shoot where I couldn't have done something better, ever. Like there always could be something you could have done better, whether that was just move the camera a little to the left, to the right, or a little higher, or you change the lighting. There's never a single shot that I wouldn't have something that I think I probably could have done a little better, which I think it helps you continue to push yourself. Because if you just say, I'm great, you're great, you're done, essentially. So.
Yeah, you're not really giving yourself much of a challenge, are you, if you take that approach? So I mean, good for you for walking away from it all and always and having that analytical openness to look at your work in that way. But I think you also need to add in there that there's definitely a certain amount of luck.
Total luck.
So look, before we wrap, I've been asking this of most of the people I speak to. You've obviously talked to me about what COVID has done to change your life and your situation. We talked about your amazing camper van, and I think Lucas Gilman definitely has a second career as a food photographer. That's for sure. What do you think, or can you name one thing that you think will change forever as a result of COVID?
Oh, I think that, that's a hard question. I think there's a lot of things. I think that we, as global nomads, took a lot of things for granted. I think it's going to be more difficult. And I'm not saying it's not undoable, but I think the days of just hopping on a plane going wherever you want in the world are going to change somewhat, maybe for the better, in a sense, to where maybe there won't be as much pressure on some of these beautiful places and things. But I'm optimistic that, as long as we work together as a human population, we've been on this planet for a long time, to go out and help each other. I think that, things will return to normal, and I don't know what that new normal will be, but I hope that it will be something where it'll be fulfilling. We'll be able to cherish these amazing places that we have on our planet. And maybe this is just a reboot to say, hey, maybe there was too much pressure, too much, some of these places that I've gone, Iceland in particular, like we were loving them to death. There were just too much pressure on these things. So hopefully everybody will be able to continue to live their lives and enjoy some of these special places. And maybe this is just a time to, to take a bit of a reboot, and, hopefully we'll find some sort of a vaccine that'll allow us to then share a pint or whatever your preferred beverage is, and, in person soon enough.
Indeed, I agree. And maybe even from one of those North drinkware glasses too.
I will tell you, whiskey tastes better out of a North drinkware tumbler. I will tell you. I speak with experience.
That's very true. Well, it is turning into a we love North drinkware. So just on that point, if you didn't catch it at the beginning, North drinkware, these amazing glasses, shots by Lucas, giving a set of 2 of these away to one lucky person. Drop some comments in Instagram profile or in the YouTube comment feed, and we'll pick a winner. Yeah, indeed. I look forward to the opportunity, Lucas. It's been a while. Hopefully it won't be as many years again. But for now, we've definitely done we nailed our time. Believe it or not, it sort of flew by. Thanks very much for coming on. For bizarrely, like it's now the picture. There's no pixelation, and
I look good now.
You look great. So we can see you perfectly. Thanks very much for joining me. It's been really fantastic talking to you. Sorry we didn't get through all the images. There's clearly too much to talk about. I think, I've said this to a few photographers I've spoken to. I think we might have to do a part 2. So I'm going to start to sort of look back and see, even if maybe I can do the visit in person. I'll do a sweeping flying visit to the US.
You should do a tour. We'll host you.
Excellent. Yeah, I look forward to that tomahawk. All right. Take care for now.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on, man. Incredibly inspiring photographer. Goodness me, Lucas Gilman has had some pretty amazing opportunities. He's got some pretty great stories, though, that take those opportunities and really harness them. He's come a long way from being that press photographer, and he's definitely got a long way to go. Look out for any of his new film work that's coming out, but also to keep an eye on his food photography, because I have to say, it's pretty special. Thanks for joining. Don't forget to check out North Drinkware, and if you're interested, go and buy some prints at the website following. Take care, and until next time.